from 14 wins in one season, having 29 wins by the All-Star break, 3 games above 500, and 2.5 games out of play-in contention, the Detroit Pistons are shattering expectations. 24.5 was their over-under win total, and they've blown that out of the water. The new one is set at 41.5, and they're favored to get past that number. They're on track for it. They definitely are. But based on the season they're having, this is a historic feat. Not a lot of teams have gone from worst in the league to making the playoffs the next year. We still have more to go for Detroit. There's a lot of things that could happen, and knowing the NBA, knowing the Pistons, things could turn around in an instant, and we could be fighting for the play-in. But they've shown night in, night out, they can play up to the competition of the NBA great teams, and they're not playing down to the competition. We saw in wire-to-wire victories versus Charlotte and Chicago to end the first part of the season. But like I was mentioning, there's not many teams that have the same sort of success the year after being complete garbage. So we're going to look at a few of those teams. The first team I want to look at is the 08-09 Miami Heat compared to the year before, the 07-08 Heat. I mean, in 07-08, they were 15-67, landed the second pick, got Michael Beasley, and that was the worst in the NBA. The next year, 43-39, made the playoffs. And yes, it was a loss to Atlanta 4-3. But, I mean, Dwayne Wade was looking like a pure MVP caliber player. 30 points, 7.5 assists, 5 rebounds a game. But they didn't do too much to change the roster in the offseason. Traded for Jermaine O'Neal, Sean Marion. Those are key additions, but they were already aging up. They were getting older. So it's not like they were moving the moon kind of guys. But the big thing is they also drafted Mario Chalmers, which ended up being more of a key addition in the big 3 days. Michael Beasley was a good 15, 16 point per game scorer. And the thing is with this team, bringing in those key veterans in Jermaine O'Neal and Sean Marion mimic a little bit what Detroit has done with Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias Harris, Malik Beasley, getting veterans in the room that have been around the NBA, been around a lot of different situations. And I already mentioned Dwayne Wade playing at an MVP caliber throughout this year. And I don't want to compare that to Cade Cunningham because Cade's not averaging 38 and 5. But Cade Cunningham is definitely the Dwayne Wade of this team if we're comparing these two rebuilds. But I don't want to because there's a lot of different circumstances here. But looking at these win totals, it reminds me a lot of Detroit as well. 15 wins in that 1 year. Detroit had 14 last year. And then the next season for Miami, 43. And I think that's a good little sweet spot for Detroit. Even if they cool off, they're on a great track to be able to hit at least 43 wins. And I might have mentioned it off the top, but it was a first round loss to Atlanta 4-3. And the next team has a couple of asterisks that I want to get out of the way early. It's the 13-14 Phoenix Suns. Well, I guess the 12-13 to the 13-14 Phoenix Suns. First year, 25-57, worst in the West, not necessarily NBA. And then here's the other kicker, 48-34. The next year, they missed the playoffs by a game. But the big thing I wanted to talk about this one was the emergence of Goran Dragic and the 23 win difference. I mean, that's about double their win total, and I feel like that's a huge ask. And if you're looking at what Detroit's going to do, they're not going to hit 48, I don't think. They could get around that number, maybe in the 43, 44, 45. But, I mean, that's almost 3 times the wins of their first of last year when they had 14 wins. But going into this Phoenix team a little bit, Goran Dragic led the Suns in scoring, assists, becoming the focal point of their offense. So this was also first year of Jeff Hornacek there. Fast play style of offense, sharing the basketball, moving it around. A lot of three-point basketball. This was a year before the big Golden State explosion, but they were already playing. I'm pretty sure this was a 3-guard lineup as well. But playing small ball, sharing the ball. And this was really an offensive power team that did struggle on defense. And their key free agent signing was Channing Frye. Key trades, Miles Plumlee, Eric Bledsoe, and I don't know if you can call Miles Plumlee a key trade. They drafted Archie Goodwin. So in this one, you can't really use these signings and free agents and trades to compare it to Detroit for their offseason. I would even say this was a lesser offseason from Phoenix in between their 2 seasons. The biggest thing was getting Eric Bledsoe, phenomenal player from the Clippers at the time, similar to Reggie Jackson from the Thunder. I can kind of see the parallels there. Young guards that want a little bit of a change of scenery. But yeah, this was all internal growth from Phoenix for the most part, as well as a new coaching system that implemented and fit their players into the best spots. And the most infamous one is the 1997-98 Spurs to the 1998-99 Spurs. Worst in the NBA at 20-62, then made the playoffs and won the NBA championship in a shortened season at 37-13. We all at this point know NBA history and how this team got good. It was David Robinson had an injury, and they were able to form one of the best dynamic duos in the front court in NBA history with Tim Duncan with the number 1 pick that year. I mean, he was immediately the centerpiece of that team when they still had David Robinson. The only comparison I can think of is if Dirk Nowitzki was still super dominant in his prime and Luka Doncic was drafted and they're like, okay, that's the centerpiece. He is the future now. He is everything we care about at this point. And obviously, I mean, did they really care about him? And this is another team where it's vastly different from Detroit and vastly different from Miami and vastly different from Phoenix. No key free agent signings. They relied on internal growth and the additions of Tim Duncan and the return of David Robinson from injury. No key trades. And there was, the draft selection, Tim Duncan. But I'm going to be kicking myself if the Detroit Pistons at the end of the year are not in the playoffs and they flame out in the play-in or they miss it entirely somehow. And this video means nothing at that point. Because the Detroit Pistons have a chance, like I've mentioned so many times in this video, to do something few teams have done. And then they can go from last year being in the history books as the team that lost the most consecutive games at 28 in NBA history to being one of the best turnaround stories in the NBA, 30 for 30 type of content at that point. But we'll see what happens. Make sure you check out the Leggy Sports channel, comment, like, subscribe if I'm missing any content. If I have some facts wrong, I'd love to be corrected on those things. But thank you for joining me so much. Have a great night. Go Pistons.